Greetings, all. Welcome to another exciting episode. Today, we have the privilege of introducing an extraordinary saxophonist who seamlessly blends the worlds of jazz improvisation and Carnatic Indian classical music. Meet Prasant Radhakrishnan, a protégé of the legendary Kadri Gopalnath, who revolutionized the role of the saxophone in Carnatic music. Prashant's performances traverse the realms of traditional Carnatic concert programs while also blurring boundaries with his VidyA ensemble, featuring instrumentation from the jazz tradition. Moreover, he embraces music as meditation, bringing forth unique philosophical perspectives through his artistry and teaching. Prepare yourself for a captivating journey through the innovative sounds and insights of Prasant Radhakrishnan. Welcome, Prasant. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bradley. It's great to see you. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Could you please provide us with an overview of your background and how you would describe yourself at present?
Well, in context of what we're talking about, I mean, there's so many things that we could look at, and at the same time, nothing at all, really. Just living life as everyone else, as we all are. But my background, of course, as you mentioned so kindly, is really mostly in music, and I was exposed to music really from a young age, just like many other musicians, especially Indian music, starting with Indian bhajans, like group bhajan singing. It's something that happened where I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and then also Indian classical music, but grew up here in the US, so was exposed to jazz, school band, Western music, everything all at the same time. So musically, that was kind of my background, is just being steeped in all these different traditions at the same time. But I was lucky to go and study music with my musical guru, Sri Kadri Gopalnath, in India when I was a young teenager. And that got me much deeper into the Indian classical traditions. And, the journey just kind of continued from there. And after some years, ended up doing music as a full-time life path, so to speak. And that just kind of revealed everything as a lens or as a way of being in general. And so, I'm just lucky to have that as my way of being here through music.
And over the course of that development, how did you find the Carnatic tradition and the jazz tradition work together or independently to influence your approach to music, but improvisation specifically? And how have they shaped your musical experience?
Oh, I mean, so much. They both, as what you said, is both independent and together, because I was exposed to them simultaneously pretty much growing up. So I started getting more interested in music as I got a little bit going through grade school and middle school. And that's kind of when you get exposed to jazz. And I started studying with my Carnatic music teacher around that same time. So it was interesting how they both were brought in at the same time. I did end up studying Carnatic music a little more intensely thanks to my teacher, training me. But I was still exposed to jazz all the time. So they were both kind of going in two tracks, kind of in different ways. But I would always notice that whatever I learned in Carnatic music would benefit what I was doing on the Western side of things, whether it's jazz or just playing in ensembles, and vice versa. The stuff I learned in the jazz tradition, especially listening to the musicians and their sound, especially on my instrument, which happens to be the saxophone, hearing the great players in the jazz tradition, because there's so many great ones. Whereas in Indian classical Carnatic music, at the time, there was really only my teacher, was the only one doing it on the saxophone. So hearing more input of the type of sound you could get on the instrument, I think, was really helpful. And over time, they kind of started to merge together. The longer I lived with both of these traditions, first I was interested in combining them, and I started to just hear music that combined these two, and so then I would be interested in how to combine them. But eventually, it's sort of that melted away as well, and then just kind of left with a common ground, which is actually quite large. There's actually a pretty large common ground there. So that's kind of how where it ended up to some degree.
Amazing. And it's a journey that continues. This is a process in progress, of course.
Very much, yeah.
How does your experience or approach to improvisation differ, comparing your more traditional Carnatic performances and that setting, and the more boundary blending approach that you take, for example, with your VidyA ensemble?
That's a great question. There, on some level, yes, and on some level, it's the same. So on one level, I do see a difference, where just by the way the music is applied. So in Carnatic classical music, there's already that's been set for us by previous generations of master artists, the way that we approach the concert structure and where the improvisation goes, and generally how that improvisation unfolds. So there's quite a bit of freedom, but there's also quite a bit of structure to that freedom in Carnatic music. So you kind of know when you can be in complete freedom, and other parts you have to be watchful to be staying within that path. It's kind of like driving the car on the road versus maybe being in a huge field where you can just drive anywhere you want, as an example. But in combining Carnatic music and jazz, for me, the context for that has always been my own original music, because I started that journey of, combining these traditions, really just like I said before, just by seeing it in the common ground and the compositions that were arising for me. And so automatically the context was different, because in that context, I was able to create whatever wanted to come out. And the context gave me more freedom, I would say. So at the time that I was doing more of those compositions, there was an interest in, bringing the best and, combining them in a very tasteful way and things like that. But at the same time, it was very spontaneous. So on one hand, you had the technical side of combining these two traditions. And on the other hand, we were able to create spaces in those compositions where I actually did feel a little bit more free to improvise, compared to some situations in Carnatic music. So because you no longer have a particular thing that you have to do, but you're actually setting up a space for something that you can do and explore. That are, adhering to particular cycles and particular times was a little bit different in those original compositions. So that's kind of the difference I noticed.
Can you take us into your compositional process? So these different terrains that you're creating, the structures in which you can launch your improvisations and that bring together your knowledge. How do you come up with those? You said you started to hear these compositions. How do they come to you? Just introspecting upon the process by which they emerge. Yeah.
Well, that's also a wonderful question that I think a lot of composers will also probably say that it's a mysterious process. But for me, my earliest compositions, and I think this is still the case, that it did spontaneously arise for me. So I would usually actually start hearing the song, almost like you're hearing anything else. But it would be, either fully formed or it would be like 50% or 3/4 formed. And from there, I would take that and then continue with it until it was something that we could play. So I remember the very first song that I wrote for VidyA, which is called Ascent, and we played that for many years, and it was always kind of like one of our fun tunes that we'd play. That song was pretty much, I'd say 95%. I just heard the whole song, and then including the bass line and the rhythm and everything like that. So I can't really say it was much skill on my part. I just we heard the song and then tried to work out any other details to bring it in to the actual physical manifestation of it. There are other times where I would have a piece of it that would be very compelling. I would start hearing things, hearing a particular bass line or a particular groove or rhythm, and then put those things together. And then as I would work with it, the rest of it, I would hear the rest of it. That's like most of my compositions. There are a few where I felt, let me try something like this, and maybe I want to do a particular groove or a particular raga, for example. So I found the same thing. So I would start with a little tidbit, and then once I start working on it, the rest of it would show up. So yeah, so that's mostly been my process.
A mysterious expression of the inner workings combined with craftsmanship, of course, and musicianship. So, and in VidyA, your fellow musicians, are they all as well versed in Carnatic and Western, more jazz-oriented music, or is there more variety in terms of their experience and expertise?
There's definitely more variety, which I actually think was very cool for what we were doing at the time. We had one thing that was cool, for example, Samir Gupta on the drums was very proficient in tabla. So he was studying North Indian classical Hindustani music on the tabla, but he was also a great jazz drummer and had a lot of really wide range of influences musically. And then David was and still is. They both are very active on the scene. Great jazz bass player, and also very, very open in terms of just his ears and heart and everything, hearing the music and really responding beautifully. And David, we would work together, getting some of the subtle Indian classical gamakas, the ornamentations, and he would actually play them on the bass like a violinist. So there was just that trio. And at one point we had a violinist who had a Carnatic background as well. But even on the acoustic bass, he was able to make both the role of a bass player in a jazz trio, and at the same time, a Carnatic violinist who shadows the artist, like in a Carnatic music concert. So that was a really interesting instrumentation and interaction there.
Wonderful, amazing. What is the significance of the name for this group, VidyA? How did you choose that name?
VidyA is just, you could say it's a path of knowledge, or it's a path of inner knowledge. Some you may call it like a divine knowingness, divine knowledge. And we came across the name just, I think my sister actually, we were brainstorming, and also the band, we were all brainstorming different names. And this is one of the names. I think my sister actually, Smitha, suggested it, but I don't remember 100%. And it just kind of felt right. And so we used that name, and just kind of stuck with it. So this song, VidyA so far, recently haven't been performing as much because we're all in different places, but we might get it going again, hopefully, if we can make it happen.
Splendid. Would it be possible to share some standout experiences where improvisation took flight, or you had some kind of interesting experiences? Can you share that memory that has made an impression on you?
Well, for me, it's improvisation, kind of almost like you're saying, like a peak experience while improvising. A lot of jazz musicians have talked about that. For me, it was, I didn't have one in particular. It was really just an overall buildup over time of continuously having that experience. So for me, improvisation, at least in the Carnatic side, which is what I was taught from my teacher, uh, that came really naturally to me for some reason. What they call the Swara Kalpana and the Raga Alapana. And I think that's thanks to Kadri sir, because I learned with him uh, sort of a mixture of the older apprentice style and the more modern sort of taking lessons, because I didn't live with him for 12 years like they used to do in the old days, but I did stay with him during summer and winter breaks. And so because of that, I got to travel with him and just be on the concert stage with him. So all the concerts, I would just be sitting there. And then eventually was also kind of playing along as a just a support. And so I think I was able to pick up on uh, just the feeling of what it feels like to improvise in the moment. And so I always did feel a lot of enjoyment and freedom and just peaceful exploration during improvisation. I never really felt that pressure. I work with a lot, music students, and some of the things they ask about are like, oh, like I'm not sure what to play or something. Like I don't know what to play next, or I keep playing the same thing. And there are solutions to those, but those are things I only thought of after teaching. But as far as playing is concerned, I did feel like once you enter that space, it is like you said, it's kind of like taking flight, where the conscious thinking mind sort of disappears, and you're going, just in a natural state of flow or state of being, and you're just witnessing an unfolding of how the music is coming out, and it's always kind of a surprise. And sometimes it doesn't go the way a concert might expect it to go if it doesn't land perfectly or something. But most of the time, it goes pretty well, and it's always a surprise to see how that unfolds. So for me, it's really been there are just, I think, too many experiences of those. It's kind of just build up over time, and an overall appreciation for how something like improvisation can give us back our own natural feeling of spontaneity and just being ourselves. I think that appreciation sort of stayed with me over time.
Beautiful. That is kind of idyllic perspective on approaching improvisation as something that builds naturally. And what more can you ask than for the demonstration of what it is to play, to create? Did Sri Kadri Gopalnath ever share anything specific about improvisation that you recall? Did he ever give you some kind of insight that stuck with you?
The funny thing is that's a great question. He didn't really say too much, so I think I have to thank him for that proximity of being listening and playing with him. I do remember the first lesson, like when we were together, and he was just teaching me some compositions, and then he just said, "Oh, why don't you try Swara Kalpana? Just start playing." So Hamsa Dhwani is the raga, which is it's kind of a derivative of like a pentatonic within the major scale. It's a pretty easy raga on saxophone. So he said, "Just play Hamsa Dhwani," So I just started playing something. I'm like, I didn't know what he wanted me to play. He's like, "Just play, play, play." So, and then I just started playing some stuff, and then I remember feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. This doesn't sound that good. And he was like, "Yeah, that's right. Keep going." So he just wanted me to get into it. Just, it didn't matter what really I was playing. He just wanted me to get into that, jump in into just playing and not worrying too much about it. So I think his teaching approach when it came to improvisation was really good, and I think that's probably how I teach too, because of him. That it's not a restrictive approach. I studied with other people that he, when he was, for example, out of town or something, he would say, go and study with for example, T.R. Sir and some other musicians. And I had some mentors who I would just meet. And I noticed that some of the other teachers were more restrictive in the process. They would say like, okay, play this and then play this and then learn this and then, build on that. And and that works too. And that's very useful too. But I had come from the complete other side of it, which was just start playing and just see what happens. And I feel like they're both important, but I think just start playing naturally and see what comes out and then sculpt it is, I think, what gives people that feeling of freedom and being able to enjoy improvising and be able to enjoy playing from the get-go, rather than having to create the mold and then break it. I feel like it's easier to just improvise and then, you can sculpt it as you need to, as you listen more and more and get more comfortable.
Fantastic advice for improvisers, people learning to improvise or deepening their practice of improvisation, taking what's happening naturally and then molding or exploring that, expanding, altering.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Could you delve into the connection between meditation and improvisation or music more generally? How do they intertwine in your approach as an artist, as a person?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they very much intertwine. It's the way I feel it is that, meditation is really just another word for describing our own nature, which is, just the feeling of being or the feeling of pure awareness. So a lot of times we describe meditation as an activity of focusing on an object or focusing on a practice. But really another way of looking at it is that, meditation is when you sort of withdraw from all the practices and then you just rest in your own feeling of being, which is what's natural to everyone. That's the one thing that's the most natural to all of us. So when we see meditation as more the foundation of what we are, before everything else arises, then we can, it's really more of a resting. And then the spontaneity is kind of a natural byproduct, because, in that feeling of just being, then things just happen naturally. So in that way, the improvisation is the most natural thing there could be, in that it's spontaneous and also that it arises on its own. So as I was saying earlier, the other jazz musicians, many people have talked about, oh, I've had a moment where I was just like, everything was just happening. I wish I could get back to that moment or something, when they were playing their solo and then everything was just happening. And that's actually how it really is. So when the thinking mind isn't there, then we get to enjoy that. So that's the way that I look at it, is that the meditation is the foundation and the improvisation is a natural, like kind of a wave arising out of the ocean of that, I could say. But I do understand that not everyone sees it that way in the beginning. And I didn't always see it that way. It's more of over time you discover it to be that way. And the improvisation approach can merge very well with a meditation practice. And so if you're meditating, for example, to continuously let go of the thinking mind, for example, is a common approach, and resting in a feeling of awareness, you can do the same thing when you're improvising. And then also, because improvising is an activity, a lot of people are much more comfortable with some kind of an activity rather than just being. So through the activity, you can also discover that you're just being, or you're simply aware or witnessing while you're improvising. And then that again benefits the meditation. And then throughout the day, it becomes a natural feeling of just experiencing a rising of experience.
Would you be so kind as to demonstrate this process of revealing the natural state of the mind through the practice of creating music and improvisation?
Yeah, there's so many connections there. So it's kind of like on the very ground basis, it's sort of, the most easy example is really the ocean being, the vast ocean, and all the experiences arising kind of like waves out of the ocean and then again dissolving. And during the entire process, they're that very ocean. So similar to the feeling of our beingness being like the ocean, and then all of the experiences arising like waves. But wherever we are in terms of how we're seeing that, you can make the connection back to the source of that. And music is a really great way for doing that, largely because it doesn't necessarily have to engage the thinking mind. And that's why people who don't practice music, maybe, but they like music, that's why they enjoy it. Because when they listen to that, they're not engaging the thinking mind at all. They're completely going to the feeling, just a pure feeling. They feel it, just going into feeling. And then from the feeling, resting in being. So I can share a little bit of an approach that I've been talking about for a while that makes it really simple. You want me to do that?
Oh, please.
I can do that. So I have my saxophone here. And
that would be amazing. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so this is just a very simple meditation that anyone can do. So again, like I said earlier, just our natural feeling of being is all that we need. So even if you don't do music or improvisation, you can still, be in meditation all the time, just by simply being ourselves. But through the sound of music, you can help to dissolve the thinking mind, which is probably the most important step, right? Because during improvisation, for example, those who want to be improvisers and are having trouble, that's usually the main barrier, right? So you're trying to think about what to play, but the music happens a lot faster than the thinking mind can operate. And I know with young students, for example, I have more young students these days as well. When they go to do their first recital or like a first program, even if it's just one song, they're very surprised when they get up there and they forget everything they practiced, or the stuff they practiced really well. Suddenly they're like, I just blanked out or something. And that's because I think spontaneously in a performance, your mind actually goes into a deeper state. You go into something that's more like meditation, actually. And it has both a relaxing and it has also a heightening of awareness, where you're more vivid. So if you're not used to that, it kind of opens things up, and then you're like, wait, what's happening? So you can access that through music without having to really do too much or try too hard. So the approach that I like to share is something just very, very simple, just by noticing the nature of sound. And basically, once we recognize what sound is and experience it, also notice its nature. And then by us experiencing that nature, we recognize our own nature. And it's something that you can have experientially rather than technically, sort of theoretically. So I usually offer like 3 steps to it, which is very simple. And the first one is to just enjoy the sound, which is something all of us know how to do spontaneously, right? So anytime you hear a song or something that you like, automatically you're going to enjoy that sound. So that's the first level of meeting a sensory object, is you actually taste it. It's like food, tasting it. You taste and you enjoy the experience of that as a sensory object. So in the first pass, and anyone can practice this, whether they're doing music practice or as a listener can also practice it. But it's especially powerful for a musician because you're producing the sound yourself, which kind of, it's like a feedback loop into your own being. So it makes it a little bit more interesting. But as a listener, you can do it just as well. So I'll play a sound, and in the first, we're just going to enjoy, and I'm also going to just enjoy the sound. no expectation as to how it needs to be good or bad or anything. Okay, so that's just simply the first natural step. And you can kind of notice how it feels. But your awareness, the feeling of you being aware, is reaching out and touching and tasting sensory object that's appearing in your awareness. And you're uniting with that. You're kind of tasting it. So two separate at the moment coming together and enjoying. So that's the first step. The second pass we're going to take is where you recognize the sound to completely take over your entire experience, which is actually somewhat the case. Because if you hear a sound, it doesn't have a particular location, but it actually fills up your whole field of experience. So if you see your experiential, just your experience as a field of awareness, like from whatever you're experiencing and everything that you experience is something like a field, you could say. And when a sound enters the field, it fills up the whole field. So you can just observe and see if that's the case for you. So in the second one, we're going to let the sound actually fill the whole field of awareness and just notice that it's completely taking over everything. So there's only sound, basically. So in this, we kind of merge with it. Okay, and so the second part, you can normally spend more time on that, but you kind of will start to notice you're shifting into a more it might be more relaxed, a little bit more open. And this is something you could do on your own, of course. And the third and the final part is to actually, now after the sound has filled up the entire field of awareness, so there's nothing left but the sound. Now there isn't the feeling of separation between you and the object now. So either you've dissolved or the sound is dissolved, but usually the separate feeling of me, which is often arising as a thinking mind, gets dissolved in the sound. So you can almost imagine like how sound might dissolve other smaller vibrations. Similarly, like the sound fills you up and there's nothing left but sound, like kind of like ice melting in water. So if the water was the sound. And then the last step, you're going to recognize that something is witnessing that's already been dissolved in everything. And so that witness or that awareness is that aspect of us that is usually neglected in the background of the thinking mind, or it's kind of just silently watching everything, but we don't watch it. And so we forget that it's there. And that's what usually shows up in those moments of clarity and improvisation, because you're actually aware that all of this is spontaneously arising. And that's the awareness, what I like to call pure awareness. So the same technique, we feel the sound filling up, and then notice whenever you feel, very comfortable, filled up with a sound, simply noticing that something's aware of this, and that usually spontaneously comes forward by itself. All right, so that's a general overview of a technique that people can try.
Wonderful. I love how you make it so accessible, and
Yeah.
anyone can sit down and play a note. You have the freedom to step outside and experience, but that can all be developed from the most basic experience of sound. It's just wonderful and inspiring to start from a tone, a sound.
Yeah, and that's actually since that's the most fundamental, I think, and it's also for musicians. On one hand, you have anyone in the world who can hear, and even people who can't hear externally can hear internally. Usually, sounds. So anyone can practice it for getting back to their own nature and getting into a more meditative feeling, getting to a feeling of being and freedom and peace and all that. On the same hand, musicians can also do that, getting to because musicians have different set of difficulties and challenges, right? Navigating being a practitioner or professional musician, so getting that peace and enjoyment back of music that you had when you were a kid, when you first started, before all the pressures of performing a certain way in music, getting back to that enjoyment, just the pure enjoyment, just like when you taste your mom's cooking after being away from home for years, and you go home and mom makes your favorite food and you taste it, and that's that familiar taste and the feeling of home is, I think, what a lot of musicians that's one of the feelings that makes people play music for so long, and it's just that feeling of being yourself through this experience, and so I think that something as simple as just playing a note is so natural to us, and it's also safe. There's nothing to do with it. Really, you don't have to even play it in tune and perfectly, and it's just being yourself and the sound of the note of whatever the instrument that you love.
How do you situate yourself in kind of broader traditions that you've studied from?
Yeah, I mean, it's, well, how First of all, for the breath and the sound, I think they are very closely interrelated. Uh, in Indian traditions, I don't know particularly, but in Carnatic compositions, many of the great saint composers have talked about sound as a means to realization, um, especially Tyagaraja, Muthuswami Dikshitar. One of my favorite kritis, Nada Lolurde, is talking about Nada, celebration and enjoyment of sound as the way to um, Brahman, or the expansive um, ocean of being. And sound is the most direct way. And Tyagaraja was a bhakta, that's somebody who worshipped Rama and stuff, and yet he still talked about this. So the sound of itself transcends even the breath. However, the breath is, we all have bodies. So the breath is, and also being a wind instrument player, the breath is so core to even making the sound. So by taking a breath, we were able to actually still the mind. It's very simple because even in the ancient teachings, also more modern teachers like Sri Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi talked about control the breath and you control the mind. So when you restrain the breath to some degree, automatically the thinking mind sort of rides on the breath. So the thinking mind will slow down and go into the rhythm of the breathing. And it can also dissolve completely just through breath. But if you combine breath and sound, it's even more powerful. So by singing songs, playing songs, that's why people feel so good when they play a song. You're harmonizing the breath, the intention, and the sound all together. But the last ingredient that a lot of people miss is just simply awareness. And so, what we were talking about earlier, if you begin to incorporate just the natural meditative awareness with all of the other things you're already doing, then it's like the final ingredient is there from the beginning. And so the whole process can be enjoyed, the entire way through. And you get more and more enjoyment of it while not having any of the confusion that arises from the individual thinking mind trying to do something specific.
It's amazing how much this aligns with what we're learning from the neurophysiology of musical experience, and that which was known by Tyagaraja and Dikshitar and others is coming to light under these new techniques for looking into the brain.
That's amazing that science is catching up so much to that. It's great because we have it from all angles. So we had the sages and teachers telling us these techniques and also discovering it. So like the technique that I shared earlier, it was something that came spontaneously for me. I didn't actually study that particular meditation or anything. That was something that was kind of revealed within. But there's so many other things that have been there. And then seeing how you're talking about the science confirming it, it's so helpful for everyone to really discover, because you can now present a complete whole picture. Like, these are some techniques, these are some concepts, but then here is the science, because people really want to know that too. Like, is this really, like, why should I do that? So being able to show that entire picture, I think it's going to be very, very helpful to people.
That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that system with us, and for treating us to a dip in the practice that you've developed. You've been sharing this practice. People can discover this through your website and follow you, and you do these satsangs semi-regularly, I believe.
Yes, right? Yes. I recently I've been a bit busier, but during the COVID time, they were quite regular. But we'll start it pretty soon, more regularly. But yeah, people can just contact me online, or if they want to attend.
Does dreaming play into how you approach composition, or the development of your practice of music? Has it ever led to an insight that opened the door to something for you, or is it? Do you have a dream practice that you could share with us as well?
So many things can happen in dreams. I know in the Tibetan tradition, the dream practice is plays a big role, dream yoga. But from the teachings that I was exposed to, which is primarily, that which is the three states of waking, deep sleep, and dream are coming and going in our true nature, the self, and that they're only passing. So in the practice of, or just rediscovering what we are, just being what we are, we want to focus on the actual awareness of being, and not overemphasis on the waking state, dream state, or the deep sleep state in terms of wanting to realize the self, But definitely all of those states have experience. Although in the deep sleep, there isn't so much experience. It's just like a peaceful sleep. But in the dream state, I wouldn't say that I worked consciously with worked at a dream state as it relates to improvisation. But I do see how they can be related, which is that the dream state usually is more of the deeper aspects of our mind that's not conscious to us in the waking state is usually expressed in the dream state in some way, shape, or form. And in improvisation, you also, when you really go into true improvisation, which is not mechanical playing what you've practiced, but you're actually truly spontaneous. That means you're completely like you've died in that moment. To me, that's true. The true improvisation, where like the next moment you have no idea what's coming. You really don't know what's coming. You could play something completely wrong, and you don't know. So when you're in that total let go, you definitely access those deeper parts of your awareness that are normally hidden, that might manifest in the dream state. So I could see how people who practice improvisation with that kind of abandon, that kind of letting go, that kind of freedom will experience some correlation in the dream state. And even in the waking state, they might experience a change in the way they're experiencing things. So I could see how those two would be correlated.
Yeah, to let go to the point where you don't know what's coming next is that's a daring space for improvisers to tread upon.
That is, and I think it helps to, if someone does, for example, someone is listening to this and wants to experience that. I think one nice thing about certain ragas and something like Carnatic music, or you want to actually simplify things a little bit so that you feel a little bit safer to play. So, if you have a raga which doesn't have too much cultural context, or if you're playing in a jazz tradition and you put down a chord, like a one or two simple chords, instead of it being more of a skill based, like, every two chords, every chord is changing every two beats and you have to like skate on top of it. But actually create something a little simpler, and then you can give yourself the chance to actually go there. It's much easier then to be there because you're not worried then.
Nice.
Like, if I'm going to play something wrong, because it's much less likely when you only have to play 5 notes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I did have one more question, which was the history of the jazz tradition is entangled with mind-altering drugs and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
There are clearly societal and contextual drivers that resulted in that, but there may be also some relationships between the attraction of improvisation, which has this ever unknowing, almost gambling-like quality where you in some ways can be addicted in a sense, the brain being very sensitive to randomized reward.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
you get that in improvisation. You just never know what it's going to be
Yeah.
that is pleasurable or when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So there might be some connection. Then genetically, people are more or less prone to addiction. There's variance there.
Yeah.
So that may also be playing into why drugs and addiction have played seemingly an oversized role in the jazz tradition.
Yeah.
Of course, there can be interactions, and this is speculation. But is there anything like that in the world of Carnatic music? So you've had a chance to kind of see what goes on there. Are there relationships there that mirror what we see in the jazz tradition?
It's hard to say. In the Carnatic music side of things, I think the only thing they take is a good filter coffee. As far as I know, I don't know going way back what may have happened, but Carnatic music has been a relatively traditional, um, rather, you know, I don't know if I want to say orthodox, but it's quite a traditional music, which came out of sort of a spiritual tradition. So it's come out of, uh, you could say both spiritual and religious. So uh, you want, you could go to either extreme. The spiritual is kind of aspect of it is, like Tyagaraja alluded to the sound and things like that, which is more all encompassing and anyone can experience. But yeah, generally, I don't think they would take much else that I'm aware of other than coffee. They maybe choose some pan or take the sometimes to have the snuff was popular back in those days, the tobacco snuff, which they would put in the I think it's a product of the times. For example, today I don't see anyone doing that. So it's I think it's just something that helps them get into that a little bit more aware, a little bit more awake. And when you're playing music, you're like, oh, if I just take something, I can play anything, and it's like basically it's something to bring down the thinking mind and bring up the inner the deeper part that's covered up, because that's where a lot of the power comes from. So anything which helps somebody to subdue that thinking mind, they'll take it, you know. And once when we recognize that actually the thinking mind is only playing on the surface of our experience, and the basis of our experience is actually what everyone's wanting, and start to look at the basis of it, which is just the awareness, then maybe this in the future generations it'll shift to just recognizing the beingness, and then the reward of, like you're saying, the randomized reward of improvisation is like it's there all the time, like all day long. You get to, when you're resting and feeling of being, then everything that's arising is like a randomized reward. You don't know what's coming next, and that itself gives you it's like a dream, kind of like experiencing a very interesting dream, and you don't know what's going to arise next, and you're just watching it like a movie, but enjoying every aspect of it. But there isn't the worry about it, because it's all going to be fine.
Yeah, this seems to be another commonality, at least in the experience of dreams and improvisation, that comes up sometimes, which is it not being of one's control. So the dream narrative is happening to us, and
Yeah.
Improvisers will report having the music kind of happen through them or to them, or it's something
Yeah.
that seems to be beyond the conscious effort.
Definitely happening through. I think all musicians at some point can attest that understanding that the music happens through the individual rather than like by the individual, as an individual entity. Just similar to the ocean current coming via the entire ocean versus one single wave generating its own current. That wouldn't make any sense. So it's definitely kind of like that. And that's also why ensemble playing, and when you get a few people together and they go really deep into the music together, you can feel that inner wave of everyone in that group coming out as one. And I think definitely all of us do want that experience to not have the feeling of being individual, because it's very claustrophobic. Being an individual mind with a single body.
Wonderful thought to leave us on. And you've been so generous with your time, Prasant. Thank you so much. And do you want to? Can you please tell us about any ongoing projects or your website? People can reach out to you to join your meditations going forward. Is there any other project or goals that you're working on or hope to pursue that you could share?
Well, right now there are a few things that are kind of may arise here. Definitely what we talked about today, and thank you for kind of bringing that space to share about the music meditation. So that's something that I'll continue to share whenever the opportunity arises. So I think I would like to share this with more people that would benefit. So, perhaps music schools or, teachers, organizations that want to give this opportunity to the students, just so that they can have a much happier time practicing. At the very least, if anyone practicing music starts to just do this with their long tone practice, they'll have such a much more peaceful, journey, with less of the difficulties that come with the journey, and just the general public. So sharing that's probably one of the things I'll be doing. So publishing videos on YouTube and on occasion about the topic as well, so people can find me there. I'm also playing currently with my friend of probably 25 plus years, Rohan Krishnamurthy, who's a mridangam player. He's got a group called the Alaya Project, and so we're performing pretty regularly in the Bay Area. I think we're playing in SF Jazz next month, so people can come out to that show. And I'm starting to perform some Carnatic concerts as well. So, and look out for maybe some new compositions and things like that for me. But that's basically it. But I'll be around sharing these things if anybody would like to.
Yeah, amazing. And you're on Bandcamp, and your website has a lot of great resources. prashantmusic.com.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Bradley. It's great to see you.
The pleasure is absolutely mine. I should mention that you are my teacher of Carnatic saxophone, and I've just absolutely benefited so much from learning many things from you in that space. So thank you.
That's been my privilege. But I mean, you play amazingly. I remember when we first starting out, we were doing alto, and then you were telling me after you came back later, you're like, "Oh, I've always been playing Barry," and then you started playing Carnatic music on the Barry. So I've always been telling people, check out Bradley, because nobody else that I'm aware of is doing Carnatic music on Barry saxophone. So we talk about the sound and the power of the sound and stuff like that. Within that power of the sound, there's different textures and feelings by the different frequencies. Having it on Barry, hearing some of the Tyagaraja Kritis or the Dikshitra Kritis or even the improvisations on the Barry, I've always enjoyed that when we're doing it. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that encouragement. And
definitely.
I do appreciate it, and looking forward to carrying on the conversation. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Prasant. It's a great experience talking with you.
Me too. Me too with you, Bradley.